Welcome to The Filibuster, the podcast of the Union University Political Science Department. The filibuster refers to the right of unlimited debate in the U.S. Senate, sometimes called the world's greatest deliberative body. But today we're here to talk about something that predates that deliberative body and indeed made it possible to exist in the first place. It is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and we are here to discuss its legacy. So I'm Seth Brake. I'm part of the Political Science Department here at Union, and I'm joined today by my usual guest and co-host, Sean Evans, but today we also have a special guest, David Thomas, Professor of History, who is returning to the podcast. So thank you to both of you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, look at this. You were the first non-political scientist to participate, and you're now the first person to be asked to come back a second time.
Well, I am feeling grateful.
Well, it is a great privilege to have you here, so thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
So I think we know what the Declaration of Independence is. We talk about it a lot. But can you set the stage for us for the lead up to the Declaration? It was addressed to a king. What had he done and why? What was going on?
Oh, yes. The setup goes back quite a ways. The immediate setup, of course, is the king had tried to enforce the taxation rules of Parliament, sending, in particular, a navy to blockade the American coasts. And so their ire was justly, the king justly deserved their ire. The navy had created all kinds of havoc. But why is it not addressed to Parliament?
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is that the First Continental Congress more or less declared independence from Parliament back in 1774 by asserting that the colonies were the singular body that could govern the colonies. And so from the perspective of the colonial governments, they were in charge, and the king was supposed to defend their position as political authorities. And instead he did not do that. So it's addressed to the king, not to the Parliament, on purpose.
So in 2 years previous, they had declared themselves the legislative representation for themselves then.
Yes.
So you say that the Navy had been sent to blockade. Was this a reasonable reaction to what had been going on, or?
Yeah, well, reasonable is reasonable.
Yeah.
From the king's perspective, I suppose it was. It always has seemed a little bit excessive to me, given that these conflicts are really fundamentally about taxation. And most tax issues can be resolved through negotiation. Mm-hmm. But by the time we get to August of 1775, conflict had already been afoot. Lexington and Concord is April, and after that is Bunker Hill, and there are a variety of other smaller conflicts. So definitely the military arm had been engaged in multiple scenarios. And so, sure, from the king's perspective, this has escalated beyond the ability of local forces to address the situation. And so let's send some real muscle there, and off the Navy goes in the fall of 76.
So
70, sorry.
Go ahead.
Right. So, I mean,
75.
But is there a background before what you just said? So, I mean, part of the idea is that after the French and Indian War, the British had spent a lot of money. They were protecting the colonies, and they thought the colonies should pay for it. And that's what led to the taxation on some level. So did the king have a good reason for saying, here, you need to pay some money to support services that are benefiting you?
I think so. I think that the king is acting reasonably. There are two big political traditions. The tradition of rule by Parliament, and the king, of course, goes back to the founding of the colonies, and Parliament had taken charge of trade rules in particular. But the colonies also had 150 years and more of their own political representation. They cherished the English tradition of local self-rule, which goes back long before the colonies, and they were willing to defend that against all comers, to be honest. So we have these two big, long-standing English traditional systems of governments and claims to rights coming into conflict over taxation. Who gets to tax?
So the king had a reasonable request, but the way he went about doing it was the wrong way then.
I think the king had a reasonable request. Their debt was far worse than the American national debt is today. He absolutely had to do something about the debt. Parliament had to do something about the debt. They had just received a whole bunch of new territory from the French. French Canadians, of course, are Catholic, and so this meant for a complicated mixing of the two. So he had to act, sure, and he was he needed to contain the debt. He needed to contain expenses. He didn't need another Indian war. So yeah, absolutely. Parliament and the king obviously went about it the wrong way. They made some egregious errors along the way, and revolution followed.
So the preamble offers a moral argument in it. It's saying that because these offenses violate the purpose of government, the people have a right to abolish it. So in this context, does the moral case add up?
I don't know if it's a moral case or just a claim. Right? Is it just a claim? We have the right to revolt. Sure, they can claim that. Can they make it stick? That's what the war's for.
So what are just a couple things that you think people misunderstand about the events leading up to the Declaration of Independence?
Gosh. There are a few things that I think, you mean the popular imagination?
Yeah. Or my imagination.
Or your imagination, yeah. Let me probe your imagination, yeah. There are a couple of things. I think people underestimate how important the radical strategy was. I think in the popular imagination, this is just a grassroots upswelling of rebellion and anger and revolt. And it wasn't. It took work on the part of the radicals. It's a affair for coastal seaport, merchant towns for years before the radicals move it into the interior, and they worked very strategically to make this an issue not just of the local traders in Boston and Philadelphia and New York and the rest, but an issue for colony-wide. And then, of course, with the Declaration of Independence, it becomes an issue of all mankind. And this is a strategy. This isn't just local people getting mad. This is strategic. This is organized. This is planned.
Well, so then let's dig into that a little bit then. So we're 1776. We've got this war going on. We have those factions you're talking about, and then we have this document. So talk to us more about why now. Why this strategy? I mean, you mentioned the radicals. Can you tell us who they were, what this was about?
Well, sure. American politics, in the area splits easily into a few factions. The conservatives, of course, love being English. They love their king. They are often well within the orbit of royal patronage. The radicals have been listening to John Locke and other Enlightenment rationalists of the age who strike out in favor of rights for all people, liberties for all people, and political privileges which are not dependent on patronage. They're dependent on the rights given to all people. So to press this forward on the part of the radicals, Sam Adams, of course, is a great example. Patrick Henry is a great example. Thomas Paine, who's English, of course, is a great example. These people push hard for that political agenda. And the conservatives and the moderates are much more hesitant about that.
Well, what was the effect?
New nation.
Yeah. Well, Sean, what do you think makes this document so important for the nation at this time?
So I think when we're looking at this, the Declaration stands out in that the colonists felt like they had to justify their separation. This was not the first time that there had been a revolution in world history, but I can't remember a time before then where people sat down and said, here's why we're doing this. And so they make a philosophical, potentially ideological argument about here's why we are separating from Britain. And so it was a clarion call to the people in the nation, but also one to the world. I mean, to a certain extent, we have had ideological revolution since. I mean, soon thereafter, the French Revolution, the rights of man. You had communism based on Marx, Lenin, and Mao and others and their derivations. You had fascism under Mussolini and Hitler. And so what's kind of stands out in hindsight about this is that we're the only ideology, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, that is flourishing today in terms of a revolution. Because the big things about revolutions is, and it gets back to what David was saying, is this was actually a conservative revolution, which many people hear those two words together and say that's an oxymoron. But the idea is we made appeals based on things that Englishmen in England could accept, to where we were just trying to restore what we thought was already there, which is different from fascism, French Revolution. Let's destroy everything and start anew because our minds can figure out a best way to organize and run society. And no, it can't. And so the signers of the Declaration, our founders, they're really building upon past experiences and taking the best of what was there and trying to improve it.
So maybe we do need to dig a little bit into the actual things that are said, at least in the preamble portion of this, because there's a lot going on in this declaration. We've got laws of nature, nature's God, self-evident truths, unalienable rights, consent of the governed. Are you guys willing to dig into some of these things and try and understand where they come from, what they mean?
Sure.
All right. Well, I'm going to give us a little section of the preamble. Then I will do my best to read it with the correct gravitas.
Can you read it in an 18th century accent for us?
No, I cannot, unfortunately. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds or bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So, before we get into the specifics, my first question is this like a throughout history student introduction to an essay, like when in the course of human events, or why did they begin this way?
Time out of mind.
Yeah.
Well, no, so I think that first phrase, when in the course of human events, is key in this because they are laying the foundation to where this is building upon a lot of different kinds of things. What's really, really incredible about this document on some level is that it succinctly summarizes thousands of years of political thought going back to the Greeks, the Romans, Aquinas, British history, and everything else. And they summarize it really in the next two sentences of the Declaration.
Well, do we need to just jump ahead then? Is that what you're telling me? Yeah.
Sure, go ahead. Sure.
So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So let's start here. Why do they say the truths are self-evident?
Well, I think a lot of this goes back to the natural law foundations. So the idea of self-evidence, like, duh, I mean, you should understand what we're saying. And they can say that because the idea is the natural law reflects the eternal law of God, of how he organizes and runs the universe, and that everyone has a conscience and reason to where they can figure out what is self-evident. You're not supposed to kill someone. You're not supposed to steal from people. We don't really need the 10 Commandments to know that. We know it's true one way or the other. And so when they're saying self-evident, I think they're relying on that natural law foundation.
And I think that's an important assumption on the part of the revolutionaries that we may or may not still hold, right? I think the idea of it being self-evident worked for them because they are still committed to the classical virtues. They're still committed to the Christian virtues. And none of those things have become heretical, so to speak. Today, I think our culture no longer accepts that common core of virtue. And so I think it's a little bit more difficult today to say those are self-evident. And I think the revolutionaries recognize that. They recognize that a republic depends on a virtuous people. And if we lose track of that common core of virtue, then our republic is in serious danger. And so it's worth asking how self-evident are these for us? They certainly were self-evident for them. Yes.
Well, see, I think the idea that people are created equal and they have certain rights, I think everyone would agree with. Now, how they would define those ideas, I think that's where the disagreement would occur. But I think in even modern day America, there's still this idea of equality, liberty, self-governance, democracy, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But I think the assumption behind that, or the conviction, I guess, behind that it's God who is the source of equality.
Oh, yeah.
I think we spout equality and just assume it. But these folks were willing to say people are equal because there's a creator God who stands behind that. And he is rational and he created all people.
Right. And the idea that each person has that divine spark in them, which makes them special to where we cannot treat one person different than another.
This is really fascinating because it does seem like we have two slightly different interpretations of self-evidence. We have the natural law framework where we think that maybe all people should be able to see these things, but it could also be that they're appealing to this common cultural connection that they had then and maybe we don't have now. And we know what we think about that actually will change the way we interpret the rest of this document too. So let's go a little further and explore that. But let's, we can't pass over some of these things here. What about equality and unalienable rights? So
I'm in favor.
You're in favor? All right, we're putting you down on the record for that.
Wow, I mean, you see, I knew we should include him because he
That's right.
he would take a radical stand.
What is unalienable, though? That's not a word that we use anymore. I don't use it.
Well, it's
We spell it differently, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's still a word.
I'm
Yeah,
sure it's
well,
in the
yeah, I'm
dictionary.
sure-
It's not
yeah.
in my vocabulary.
right. I mean, it's the idea that it's something that can't be taken away. So life, liberty, property, if we want to go back to law. And so this goes back to natural rights, which is an offshoot of natural law. So from a natural law background is, yes, I mean, natural, eternal law leads to natural law, divine law, and then people use the reason to figure out what the natural law is to create human law. So that's kind of how the idea goes. But the idea was, even if you don't have laws, you still have to learn how to interact with others. And so there's ways about how to go about doing things. And so the idea is you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't steal, right? I mean, that's something most people know intuitively. From that idea, so the idea from a natural law is there's a duty or an obligation. You do not steal, you do not murder. That means then there's also an entitlement. I should not be stolen from. I should not be murdered. And so from that, we develop ideas like the right to life. It's your life. No one should be able to take it away, and unless you have broken the law and done something else, but still you have to follow certain things. Or it's the idea of it, you have a right to property. If you create something, it's yours. It can't just be taken from you. It has to be bought, transferred, or whatever else. And so I think that's why you get things like life, liberty, the idea to choose how you're going to make decisions, especially in politics, religion, and economics. And then they add the idea of pursuit of happiness, which harkens back to Greek ideas. And in fact, do you still teach Nicomachean ethics in political philosophy?
We've moved on to Aristotle's Politics instead.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So say this is what
problem.
This is what happens when we collapse two political philosophy classes
Yeah.
into one. But in the Nicomachean ethics, what Aristotle makes the argument for is that the goal of humans is happiness, but the real word is eudaimonia, which means flourishing. And so the idea is that English translation of eudaimonia is not happiness, it's flourishing. And it gets back to what David was talking about is, from Aristotle's perspective, it's his ethics, right? That flourishing requires, first and foremost, moral excellence. And so this gets back to the idea, you have these rights, but it's not a right to do whatever you want. It is a right to do that which is good. Now, people can do wrong, and they do wrong, but they don't necessarily have that right to it. And so this goes to the idea about why the founders believed that religion and morality is so important, which harkens back to Rome, Cicero, Machiavelli's discourses, that civic republican idea that the best way for government to run is to have public spirited individuals who would be less corruptible and would make sure government would rule in everyone's interest instead of the interest of just a few.
So sometimes people say that the preamble to the Declaration is repackaged John Locke, but what you're telling me is that's one layer of this when we have a blend of Locke and a few other things, right? Because Locke would probably say life, liberty, property, right?
Right. Well, but right, and I think the Lockean perspective is much more clear in the next sentence.
Okay, well, shall we move on then? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So where does the idea that governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed come from? Is this Locke?
Yeah, this goes back to Locke's two treatises on government. So the basic idea he's saying is, hey, in normal life, most people can figure out, hey, there's a correct way to live, all right? And so they'll follow the natural law. But if someone violates it, then the idea is everyone is responsible for punishing that person. But since we're imperfect people, we don't really want that to happen. And so what happens then is if there's conflicts and they can't be resolved, we resort to violence, and we want to avoid that. This is what he refers to as the state of war. And so the idea is that individuals join civil society who then create a government to enforce the rules that they want. But the idea is these rights are there before government and even after government, because the idea is government is created to secure and defend the rights that they think are self-evident. And so in this way, the people are consenting to the creation of government and to the maintenance of government so that society can flourish.
So, David, Sean's been telling us that these things are rooted in the philosophical tradition, that people reading this who were well-read in classical philosophy would have understood how they got here. But is this novel in the historical context, or are these things that people would have seen this as obvious leading up to this as well? Or was this something completely new? What was happening here?
I think a lot of people would have seen this as self-evident. The American economy up to that point was really very unregulated. It had a little bit of regulation attached to it, but people were used to giving their consent to government. They were used to giving and actually largely withholding their consent from taxation. And so these fit, I think, the American practice really quite well. I don't think very many people had read Locke, but a lot of people had read Trenchard and Gordon, who are a couple of British pamphleteers whose material was widely published in the American newspapers, excerpted in American newspapers. And so I think they're conversant with this both on a practical level, this is how we make taxes, and on a theoretical level through Trenchard and Gordon.
Yeah, I think there might be some understanding of this in history itself, especially British history, because Locke wrote this in defense of the Glorious Revolution. And so if people are learning a little bit about English history along the way, I think probably the philosophy and the history were woven together in some ways.
And that was a well celebrated revolution in the colonies. They loved getting rid of James II, so they pay attention to that.
All right. Well, so far it's been consensus stuff. Maybe this next sentence will be the radical one. Will be the surprise. But that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Yeah, definitely radical.
Yeah.
And only partially implemented, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're getting rid of the government in the sense of getting rid of the king. They've already gotten rid of the parliament. But as Sean said a few minutes ago, in political terms, it's an intensely conservative revolution, which is one of the reasons it's one of the very few successful revolutions. The same people are governing before and after, largely the same government structures are in place before and after, except for the absence of parliament and the
Can
king.
we even call it a revolution then, if the same people are in charge?
If you're George III, it's a revolution, sure.
Sure, yeah.
So, I mean, I'll push back. I don't think it's quite as radical as we may think, because the idea is, can people look at this and say, hey, our government today is destructive of its ends. Do we have a right to abolish it? There are people who are making that argument. But I think what the founders are also saying in the same, I guess it's the next paragraph, the one before the 27 list is it's not just a one-time thing. It's a series of flagrant and persistent wrongs. And that is what justifies the revolution. And so while we read the first three paragraphs, it's followed by 27 things about where they thought the king had gone wrong, and it wasn't something just from 1775. So it goes back years for that, to where their argument is, we've tried working with Britain for years, decades maybe even, and enough's enough.
It is impressive, though, how fast it happens.
Yes.
In 1763, the colonists are proud to be part of the greatest empire the world has ever seen. They like being English. They like being British. And it's just a little bit more than a decade before the whole thing has fallen apart.
So let's talk a little bit about the very specific circumstance that brought this document forth. I mean, how did they decide they needed to write it? Who wrote it? How did this actual document get written?
When fighting breaks out in April 75, relatively few people are thinking about revolution. The radicals who want revolution are being relatively quiet. They're not pushing that agenda very strongly, and they're waiting for the violence to ramp up. We get through the conflicts of 75. I mentioned earlier Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill and so forth. There's a terrible attempt to take Quebec in there. And still the quest for revolution isn't really solid yet. It's Tom Paine's pamphlet. It's a big old pamphlet of January of 76, which really turned the corner, I think, for many people, particularly the delegates who show up at the Second Continental Congress. And his basic argument is not that we should be sad to get rid of the monarchy. English people love their king. They don't want to get rid of their king. And Paine's argument is, yeah, we got rid of Parliament 2 years ago, but the king is a monster. The king is like the Pope. The king is satanic. We need to get rid of the king, and this is something to celebrate. It's not something to mourn. It's something to celebrate. And that turns the corner for a lot of people. I think it's in April when North Carolina first passes resolutions to support independence. I think Virginia follows in May. In early June, there are enough delegates in the Second Continental Congress that support this for the Congress to establish a committee. And this is, who is this committee? This is Thomas Jefferson. This is John Adams. This is Ben Franklin. Those are the three who did the most. Jefferson taking the lead, of course. And then Robert Sherman from Connecticut, Roger Livingston from New York, a committee of 5. Jefferson writes the most of it pretty quickly, I think. Adams and Franklin had some comments. And they give it off to the Second Continental Congress to read. They read it and make a couple of edits, the most famous being taking out the comments about slavery. And they read it a second time. And July 2, they vote for independence. And it's really kind of interesting in the records. It's just, 2 sentences. We voted for independence and on we go, talking about, requisitioning this for Washington's army, whatever it is. It's just part of the day. Adams thought that was going to be the day on which we celebrate independence with fireworks and parades. And it was July 2. But Congress read over the document a third time, and on July 4, voted to accept the document as it was, and so Adams was off by 2 days. But
that's still pretty good.
It's still pretty good. Yeah, it's still pretty good. That's right.
Well, I think what we're going to do now.
I mean, and even with that it was Lee or someone on June 2nd said we should be free and independent. Mm-hmm. And then that led to a month of the drafting, I think. So, just boom, boom, boom.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
Well, there is so much more to discuss on this topic, so I don't want to end this conversation. However, we have talked enough that we should probably pause for a break between episodes. So I will yield back the remainder of my time.